Developing a quick drawing style that's suitable for drawing complex architecture doesn't mean that we draw the complex architecture in 10 minutes, but it does mean we develop a style which, although it may still take, as in this case, just under 50 minutes to draw in real time, it ends up being, at any given minute, a fast pace where we're not drawing all the detail, but we're trying to capture the important elements of the building in a way that creates a sense of reality, but not in a precise architectural way. Let me tell you the things I focus on to be able to draw architecture such as this neoclassical building in Hobart in Tasmania in relatively short period of time. I'm using a 0.2mm pen. The important thing with architecture such as this is to really work hard at getting the perspective angles correct. Beyond that, we want to capture the regularity of what I think of as the grid structure of these neoclassical buildings, the vertical and horizontal elements that all line up precisely. Because we don't want things to look off-center, out of balance, not lining up, because that's a very important characteristic, the regularity of elements in a neoclassical facade. But the other thing is to make sure we get these perspective lines worked out. So I started with a section that was box-like across the center section of the building, and once I got the corner in, I worked the perspective angles for both sides. Now I didn't draw a straight line because I didn't want a straight line, but I did a series of dots, and you can see it on the right hand side still of the drawing. I haven't tried to work out how far across to take it because I don't know yet. Now I work across from the center to the left, just doing the main elements, these column elements. And as I go across, I'm paying particularly attention to the foreshortening because the gaps become more and more narrowed as they move further away. And then you'll notice that I did the window elements that went along at the same level. I went across all of the gaps at the same time, so that center band and so forth, because I find that way I can get the perspective angle nice and tight across all the elements. If I do all of one window and then all of another window, it's harder to get those nice straight lines at the right angle across all the elements. So I find that's important, to do elements, architectural elements, in the right order to maximize the chance of correctness, accuracy with the foreshortening, but also to get tight perspective alignment from element to element. So I then, on top of that, added the arched windows, and that took me up to another section. So I think of these in terms of sections. Started with the simplest section. Now I'm going down to ground level, and this is a little bit more complex, and this is where now I really need to work hard in my head at not letting myself slow down too much and start to try and draw too much detail. Firstly, because that's not going to go with what I've already drawn. But secondly, the important thing with a drawing such as this is to keep the rhythm, the tempo going. I need to keep the same pace of drawing happening so that there's a consistency to my marks, to my line work, to the thinking, to the way I've solved the various issues as I go. Now, in fact, what normally happens with a drawing is that in the second half, we increasingly start to draw a little bit faster than the first half. And that happens for all sorts of reasons. We're not establishing things as importantly as we are at the start because we've already established them and we can just reference off them. And that's a quicker process. But secondly, as we finish a drawing, we're often moving out into the peripheries, and that means we're drawing less detail and we're drawing what we draw more loosely. So that takes less time too. So if anything, the tempo can pick up slowly as we move through. But what we don't want to do in a building such as this is suddenly start to slow down and do one part that ends up looking like it's been done with a different mindset to the other parts. But I'm really doing the same thing here that I did on the left-hand side. I'm going across with these vertical elements, these separation pilastered elements, And then you can see me working across the whole, all the windows at once to make sure the perspective angle of this section lines up. And in a moment you'll see me. Now I'm doing the depth line all the way along, and this depth line narrows as we move further away. And now I'm negative spacing the windows. I'm really establishing the windows by drawing the space, not by drawing a window. Again, I'm narrowing the windows as they move along, which becomes easy to do when I do one after the other, going wider, not so wide, less wide again. So now, before I go across the top, actually, I've got to do this corner section, which is a bit different. So I slow down for a second just to understand what I'm looking at. We do need to understand the form that we're drawing and make sure we align it with what's happening around it that we've already drawn or we're yet to draw. But the actual drawing process needs to keep the same tempo up, the same rhythm up. So having done that, I now decide to push up with this tower. Now this is where I'm aligning what I do with what I've already done. If anything, if you look carefully at the reference, it's a little bit confusing, or it seemed that way to me, and so it's perhaps just a tiny bit too wide, is what I would say now for this part that I'm drawing. And if you haven't hit the like button yet, please, why not hit it and help me out as well. And if you'd like to have a go drawing this architecture, you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page. So why not print off a hard copy and have a go drawing this yourself. It really is a fun drawing to do. It's a fun building to draw. And if you feel that it's too intimidating, why don't you just try and draw a part of it? Just try and draw one of those first floor sections, or just try and draw the tower up the top, or just draw from ground to tower, the corner section, that corner element, and not bother with the other. That can be a great way just to do parts of really interesting buildings like this, to build confidence, to get used to seeing what we have to see to draw them. But you can see the importance of lining up on the horizontal and on the vertical. Now, of course, the horizontal includes the perspective angle. When I say horizontal, I mean the elements that line up horizontally on the actual building, not necessarily at 180 degrees on this view of it. We're starting with a section that we can draw most easily, preferably some sort of box-like structure. Preferably we start on something that's closer, because the first things we draw are going to be drawn a little more intensely, and therefore the lines will be heavier, the ink will be slightly darker. We'll probably do a little bit more detail, but all that works well visually if these things are closest to us. As we move away towards the peripheries of the object, then as we pick up tempo, because we have confidence, because we have more to reference, because with these sort of buildings, there are a lot of repeated elements. So beyond checking, say, the degree of foreshortening or checking some of the angles, we come to be able to anticipate the actual forms because we've now drawn them a number of times already. We just have to foreshorten them and so forth. It's faster. And also, as we move further away, we actually want to still be simplifying further what we draw. We want to be dropping out some of the ink work, some of the line work that we've done on these same elements that we've drawn much closer to where we're viewing, if that makes sense. So now this balustrade up here, again, I really just want to suggest the balustrade. I don't want to get bogged down drawing all the detail. So now I'm working off to the right hand side, and I've finished that first floor element. I could have gone left and right on that central part first, and then maybe done the arches above the right hand element that I've drawn at this point, and then continued going right the way across and then pop the tower on top. It was probably 6 of one and half dozen of the other in terms of which way I went. with that. So I'm just drawing a few people in at ground level, which I think is always a good thing to do. I didn't do a great job of the figures, but it's important for scale. It helps streets look a little more realistic, even just a few people. Although I must admit, I had to wait at this very busy intersection in central Hobart till there were no cars because I didn't want them blocking the wonderful ground level architecture of this building. So that's why you don't see any cars, because I made a great effort to get a photo without any so that I'd be able to draw it. And now I am. So this section I'm drawing now is where we probably have the most detail, but I don't want to have too much ink in any one place. And if we start to draw all the detail where suddenly there's more detail on the building, while it doesn't look odd in the photo or in life, it can end up becoming too black in the drawing because there's just too many lines with too much ink for the space and not enough gap between the space for the thickness of the lines. Now, one way around this is to change pens and to be, as we move further away at least, to use lighter pens. But where we simply have more detail still relatively close to us, that doesn't work as well. So simplifying the detail that we draw, I find the best thing to do. The other really important thing with architecture such as this, if we're not viewing it straight on, is to offset all the depth. We want to include every depth line. So, for instance, on the left-hand side of the building, we see the left-hand sides of the window framing. On the right-hand side of the building, different viewing point, we see the right-hand depth lines, and we see the depth lines through the wall, and we see the depth lines connected with the window beading and framing. We also see depth lines underneath, looking up. When we look straight at ground level, we often don't particularly see depth lines above or below, but as a taller building gets higher, we see the underneath of any protruding cornice or architectural element more and more, and therefore, if we want to create a sense of realism, we need to firstly see it, and it helps to see it if we know to look out for it, and then to draw it. And notice the curves on that corner tower section. Well, if you look at the reference, you'll see the curves become slightly rounder the higher they go. That's a perspective principle. As curves get higher, they become rounder. I probably haven't made my top curves round enough, which has the effect of undercutting the sense of looking up at the tower. If you think of that very top roof section as like a hat that sits on top, my ellipse for the base of the hat is not rounded enough. And that's almost like I'm looking at that section from higher up than I'm looking at the rest of the building. So here we go now with the final elements of this building. I don't intend to draw the modern architecture around it, just a few lines to suggest it, but I felt that it would just be too competitive with the wonderful architecture, neoclassical architecture of the building. And fortunately, Hobart has a great wealth of wonderful older Victorian era buildings, as we call them. They seem to have resisted the urge to bulldoze them all down in the 70s and build ugly, brutalist architecture, such as the building next to this one. But fortunately, there's not nearly as much of that happening as we can see in Sydney. So just finishing these last parts again, the alignment, the perspective angles. It's more important that we get the perspective angles of things such as that cornice at the top of the columns that comes out and runs the whole way along. It's more important that we get that straight line, nice and straight, and at the angle it needs to be, than we actually draw the details precisely. And a bit of street level. What do you think? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you look up this photo on my channel community page and have a go drawing it. Don't be put off As I said earlier, maybe just draw a section if you feel the whole lot's overwhelming. And that may be the start of working towards being able to draw more of these once you, if you like, learn the skills in doing it on a smaller scale. But look, whatever you end up drawing and however you end up drawing it, make sure you have fun. I certainly had fun drawing this. I'll see you next time. Bye.